Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. In this past year, 2012, there was quite a controversy. You couldn't even turn on your television set for about 3 or 4 days without hearing about the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer for the Cure and its relationship with Planned Parenthood. We've done many shows here showing that Planned Parenthood is getting monies from Susan G. Komen, and of course there's a lot of controversy around that, including the abortion breast cancer link. Today we have someone who was involved right in the middle of the entire controversy itself. She's our guest today. Her name is Karen Handel. She was the former Secretary of State in Georgia for several years. She ran for governor and almost became governor of Georgia, losing out by just 2,500 votes. Subsequently, she took a job with Susan G. Komen as a senior vice president, helping on public policy and smoothing the waters for what a change in philosophy that Susan G. Komen was going to try to do. So we'll let her tell a little bit of that story, or maybe all that story. Karen, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, Brendan, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the chance to be with you.
Can I ask you, how did you get involved with Susan G. Komen, and what was the mindset of the people that brought you in and what they were trying to do?
Well, I've actually known and been involved somewhat tangentially with Komen since my early 20s, back when I worked for Vice President Dan Quayle and his wife Marilyn Quayle and her activities with breast cancer awareness. And when I came on board with Komen, to be sure, the main point of my job was not Planned Parenthood, but at that time, in the late winter of 2011, that's when things were really heating up around defunding Planned Parenthood at the federal level. Komen, though, had been dealing with the Planned Parenthood backlash for, probably a decade before I came on board, and now things had taken a new turn because increased scrutiny of Planned Parenthood, yes, but also because Komen had become a much more mature organization. It was entering its 30th year, and the Komen Board of Directors was demanding higher standards and more accountability. Consequently, before I came on board, a comprehensive review of the Komen community grants was done, and what they found was that there was a whole block of grants that really weren't doing what needed to be done in the fight against breast cancer. And one group of those grants were the Planned Parenthood grants. They were poor quality grants. They were not advancing the fight against breast cancer. And that's how Komen came to the place of making the decision to transition away from those grants, as well as similar grants like those. It just so happened that Planned Parenthood had the largest segment of that particular type of grant.
Uh-huh. Now, I know that the pro-life community, when this brouhaha occurred, called up a lot of Planned Parenthoods and said, do you do mammograms? And I don't believe one Planned Parenthood does mammograms. Why did they try to give the perception that they did mammograms? So what did they do as it relates to breast cancer at these facilities? Did they do anything?
Not very much. If you think about it, being associated with Komen and the fight against breast cancer gave Planned Parenthood such added credibility and legitimacy, and kind of shielded them a little bit from, well, we do abortions, but we're also involved in the fight against breast cancer. Not so. First of all, the total value of the grants was around $700,000. Planned Parenthood's annual budget is $1 billion. So this was nary a speck on the Planned Parenthood financial statements. Secondly, you rightly point out, Planned Parenthood does not do mammograms. They are a middleman, a middlewoman, if you will, referring women out to another facility. What Komen knew is if they contracted directly for mammograms, they could do more and deliver more mammograms for women. Number three, a very real question around who would Planned Parenthood even refer, because per their own documentation, the average age of a woman coming to Planned Parenthood is just 24. That doesn't even meet the screening guidelines. A woman's first mammogram is called for at the age of 40.
Wow. So they're just basically using the whole mammogram controversy for political cover and organizational
Sure.
cover?
It was a way to rebrand themselves to, if you look at over the past 2 years or so, almost everything that Planned Parenthood does has morphed itself into the color pink, which the overwhelming majority of people associate with the fight against breast cancer. They rarely talk about the fact that they are the world's leading abortion provider because they want to talk about being known as women's health and breast cancer. But I would ask you this. How concerned were they with women's health when they were willing to literally destroy an organization like Komen that's truly about women's health? They didn't care about it one bit.
And during those 3 days that you were, that they, first, why did they want to shed their relationship? Was it hurting their fundraising? Why did Komen want to move away from giving funds to Planned Parenthood?
It was a combination of things. As I said at the outset, Komen had conducted an audit, if you will, a review of their grants to look at what was working and what wasn't working and how could they get more bang for the buck. Certainly the organization was feeling the pinch of the economic downturn. Add to that the controversies around Planned Parenthood. Komen was being tainted by those, and they were not our issue. We were not about the fight for or against abortion. We were about breast cancer, which isn't conservative. It's not liberal. It's simply about ending a horrible disease. And Komen knew that if they could get themselves up and out of it, we could realign the $700,000 to do more in the fight against breast cancer, and we could better position ourselves with the whole group of people who weren't willing to give to Komen because of the Planned Parenthood connection.
I see. I think you mentioned some bishops in Ohio were telling their constituents not to contribute to Komen.
That's right. And some people have raised that, well, isn't that bullying in and of itself? No, it was not at all the same. These were the bishops in Ohio and other bishops around the country talked to their parishioners and said, it's our counsel that you do not give to Komen, give to other Catholic-related organizations. That's very fine. There was not any kind of boycott. There weren't the kinds of threats. Planned Parenthood and their allies on the left came after Komen's corporate sponsors, threatened them with boycotts, protests, online protests, ambushing their Facebook pages, in-person protests. Komen faced bomb threats. There were even death threats against Ambassador Nancy Brinker and against myself. It was a vicious, malicious, planned attack against a good organization by Planned Parenthood and its allies on the left.
Wow. Now, you talked about, or it was mentioned in an article about how Komen really had the dazzling naivete to take some of the most pro-abortion people as consultants in dealing with this issue. Can you talk a little bit about that? Who were these people, and what organization, and what were they theoretically supposed to do, but what did they really do?
Well, first, Komen genuinely believed that we could deal with Planned Parenthood in a professional way. Planned Parenthood had been a longtime partner for Komen, and we thought that we could have an amicable split. In fact, Komen's president spoke to Cecile Richards, Planned Parenthood's president, and we thought we had what I would call a gentle ladies' agreement not to ambush the organizations in public. Komen's president, Liz Thompson, and founder Nancy Brinker went out and hired a woman named Hillary Rosen. Some of your listeners may know her from the Ann Romney's Never Worked a Day in Her Life comment. She's a frequent liberal talking head on the Sunday morning shows. She's with the firm SKD Knickerbocker, which also represented Sandra Fluke on a pro bono basis. Another partner in that same firm is Anita Dunn, former Obama White House communications director. SKD Knickerbocker was also a PR firm for Planned Parenthood. There was just a gross conflict of interest. But Komen's leadership, I was not among this, I was the odd gal out on this, really believed that it was to Komen's benefit to have a consultant who had a close relationship with Planned Parenthood, that would somehow help facilitate things in a much more positive way. In the end, I believe it was to Komen's great detriment to have trusted in that, and I think that Komen was betrayed.
Wow, I know. I noticed that they hired a guy named, with my namesake, Brendan Daly, who also worked for Nancy Pelosi, right?
Yes. Interestingly, Brendan Daly was a communications director for Nancy Pelosi before he joined Ogilvy PR, another one of Komen's PR firms. At the same time, when he worked at Pelosi's office, his colleague was none other than Cecile Richards. There, for people who would go out and read my book, Planned Bullyhood, they will find an unprecedented list of improbable coincidences of people linked, and it's really quite stunning the incestuousness that there is between the Obama White House and Planned Parenthood, along with various PR firms in Washington, D.C.
Now, do you feel that the ferocity of this attack by Planned Parenthood on Komen, was it due to other factors that were going on in Washington, D.C. at the time?
I do believe that. I think it was a couple of things. First, if you think about the week when all of this happened, it was a week of January 31st, the last couple of days of January, first couple of days of February. That was aligned right at the time that the Obama administration was trying to work its so-called compromise on the HHS contraception mandate. And it's just stunning that the Komen controversy with Planned Parenthood garnered far more media attention than what is a conscious trampling mandate around contraception, particularly for the Catholic Church. And the idea that something that's a constitutional infringement got less coverage than an argument over $700,000 against a $1 billion budget is really quite stunning. But it underscores, I think, the intent of the left to really push this so-called war on women. And it occurs to me that the Komen Planned Parenthood issue was a bit of a test case to see just how much they could really push that issue.
I see. Now, let's talk just a little, somewhat about what we call 527 committees. I know that Planned Parenthood is supposed to be a 501c3, and even their 501c4 rules, did they violate campaign finance rules, do you feel, during this election and campaign season?
I think there are certainly some issues that ought to be looked at, and here's why I say that. Planned Parenthood set up scores of political organizations across the country, these so-called 527s and independent expenditure organizations, political action committees. This Planned Parenthood gets $1.5 million a day of government funding. Government tax dollars, our tax dollars, government funding makes up 45% of its total annual revenues. Yet, a supposed nonprofit was able to, from its nonprofit side, give a gift of close to $15 million to its political organization. Just as pro-life leaders have made the strong case that government funding subsidizes the abortion business, government funding is also subsidizing Planned Parenthood's political activities as well. And I certainly believe it is something well worth looking into. How are they tracking that? Cecile Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood, spent so much of her time out on the campaign trail for Barack Obama. She, at the very end, took about 6 weeks off of, quote, vacation, but she was campaigning for him long before she went on vacation. You are not allowed to do political campaigning within a nonprofit organization. So what hat was she wearing when she was out giving speeches on behalf of Barack Obama's campaign, re-election campaign?
Is she the head of both the 501c3 and the 501c4?
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. And the other interesting thing, Brendan, is this, that Planned Parenthood isn't just about abortion politics. In one state, I can't remember now if it was Wisconsin or Minnesota, Planned Parenthood spent over $100,000 to defeat a traditional marriage amendment and to defeat photo ID for voting. So this is an organization that wants to be, and really has begun to establish itself as a real political player. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that Cecile Richards herself was personally involved in writing this HHS mandate to require contraception coverage, even by religious organizations.
Well, because it's becoming such a behemoth, and I know that Congress, or at least the House of Representatives, voted to defund it last year. Do you feel that someday that Planned Parenthood may get its comeuppance, because it certainly is a powerful entity at this current moment?
I do. I think that ultimately the side of right, and I'm not meaning that in terms of right in terms of politics, I just mean what is morally right, ultimately does prevail. I do think that from this election cycle, it's clear that on the pro-life side, we have some soul searching to do. To think about how we talk about this issue. We have so much that's on our side. You know, when Roe v. Wade was first heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, America didn't have the benefit of sonograms and the kind of science that we have today. And, you know, we should talk about the issue from that standpoint from where I sit. And then I also would say this, you know, we talked a little bit about this. I had my own faith struggle around should there be no exceptions on abortion, and how do we deal with the dual moral dilemma of a woman who is raped and perhaps becomes pregnant. And I'm not quite there on statutorily saying no exceptions, but what I would say is this. We, as those of us who are pro-life, need to really think through who is our enemy in all of this, who is the opponent. And the opponent, the people we need to be focused on, it's not those with whom we agree 99% of the time. Our opponent, our enemy, it's the Planned Parenthoods of the world. It's the Nancy Pelosi's of the world. And they count on us to be so busy fighting amongst ourselves that we limp into the fight against them. And I would just call on everyone to, you know, let's be compassionate about those who might not agree 100% and recognize that we should give people an opportunity to be our allies, not try to alienate them so much.
Mm-hmm. And do you, I know I've had Eva Sanchez on here, and she's been on my show a couple of times, and she actually quit. When it first came out, it was in Colorado that they found out that Planned Parenthood was getting funds from the Susan G. Komen, and she did some of her own investigation, and then quit 2 or 3 days later, Susan G. Komen, and has been a spokeswoman against Susan G. Komen because of the funding in subsequent years. Do you think Susan G. Komen can get out from underneath the shadow of Planned Parenthood in the future, even though this attempt was beaten back?
I believe that ultimately Komen will be at the crossroads again, because there's just too many controversies, too many issues, too many questions around Planned Parenthood, whether it is promoting sex selection abortion, sex trafficking, you know, deaths from abortion where their clinic workers didn't act appropriately and promptly to help a woman in distress. So I think ultimately Komen will be in that place. I will say that internally, you know, it's a tough battle. I mean, I saw it. I wish that, you know, for my own mistakes and how things were handled, that I would have been a little more cognizant to the internal pushback from breaking away from Komen or breaking away from Planned Parenthood. And in fact, at one meeting in the summer of 2011, one of the Komen affiliates said, leaderships from our local ranks said that the woman's right to choose is so important and so paramount that if Komen must suffer, then so be it.
Wow.
That's internally what the organization is up against. But in the end, I believe donors will demand Komen do the best that it can with its dollars. And when you're not making the most of very limited dollars, that's going to come back and hurt the organization at some point, I think.
Do you feel at the current moment that Susan G. Komen is mostly staffed with pro-abortion people who are pro-abortion or pro-choice, or are they staffed with pro-life? Or what would you say the balance is there?
I don't know. I think, from what I saw from that one meeting, there was clearly a bias to the left. But I will say that the issue of abortion wasn't discussed openly. There was just more of at least among the people who were involved in public policy, there was clearly a hostility towards conservatives that was a little bit disturbing. But because I knew when I walked through the door, my number one priority was the fight against breast cancer. I really believed that was the number one priority for everyone else as well, and I obviously was not right about that. I was wrong.
Where do you see then this whole controversy headed? Will Susan G. Komen still suffer in its ability to raise money from various factions, knowing that they are giving grants out to Planned Parenthood at this time?
I do think that the backlash will continue for a couple of reasons. One, there was so much publicity around it that people who didn't even know about the Planned Parenthood grants now do know. Secondly, for individuals who were able to somehow rationalize the donations, it was only $700,000, or my affiliate in my state, my city doesn't do Planned Parenthood grants, because Komen waffled and then in the end gave in to the left, to Planned Parenthood. In capitulating, Komen made it about politics, which then took away the ability to justify the grants, and it makes people call to question Komen's focus on its mission. And that's really unfortunate, because you can't take away, in my view, the really great good that Komen has done in the fight against breast cancer and the real impact that the organization has made.
Uh-huh. How much, how organizations have, they give a certain percentage, like the Salvation Army, I think they give a very high percentage of the money collected to beneficiaries. What do you see, for instance, how much of Komen's money goes to, say, the research in breast cancer, or does it go to other elements of the whole?
Over 80% of Komen's revenues goes to the mission, whether it be research or these community grants. Komen has gotten a top rating from Charity Navigator, I want to say 4, maybe 5 years in a row. And some people like to question that, but the organization does try very hard to make sure that the strongest percentage possible goes to the mission. And well, it should.
Mm-hmm. And just a final thought as far as the ferocity of Planned Parenthood coming back at Komen. Were you surprised by how do you feel that it was coordinated all at once, or do you feel that it just imploded by itself?
There was most certainly coordination. Cecile Richards had a phone call with Komen's president, Liz Thompson, in the second week of December, and all was quiet until that January 31st. We had no heads up that Planned Parenthood was proactively going to the press. Things were popping on blogs. Editorials were written. Dear colleague letters from members of Congress were being delivered within 48 hours. Really, Congress has not a very good ability to get much of anything done in 48 hours, let alone a dear colleague's letter signed by dozens of members. So this was clearly premeditated. It was orchestrated. Also, I saw for them targeting me and making me kind of the focal point in all of this. My husband went back and looked at my Twitter feed, and my followers started to increase dramatically in the middle part of December for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So there were lots of tentacles, and there was partnerships with MoveOn.org, Change.org. The gay and lesbian community joined in. The anti-photo ID crowd joined in. I mean, it was a full-scale, coordinated effort, along with what is clearly a very biased mainstream media. I mean, Andrea Mitchell, MSNBC's interview with Nancy Brinker was among the most biased, unprofessional interviews I have observed in my entire career.
Wow, that's really something. Well, we really appreciate, Karen, you taking the time to speak to us today here in Boston, and hopefully the word will get out far beyond Boston in the coming months. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for your graciousness. God bless now.
And we hope
Bye-bye.
you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. We believe fellow Americans need to know that there are many reasons that Planned Parenthood carries on the way it does. In a modern-day term, I would use the word a bully. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.